You are at the intersection of wealth, health, and happiness. Welcome to the Wealthy Wellthy Life. Welcome to the Wealthy Wellthy Life. I'm Krisstina Wise, and this is where I interview thought leaders who teach a countercultural approach to money, health, and happiness, because a good life is a wealthy, wealthy life. In this episode, I interviewed Dr. Eleanor Womack, and Dr. Womack is pretty impressive. She is a Harvard Medical School grad. She studied oncology before she made her way over to the functional integrative medicine side of medicine after she really was in this environment of seeing so many people die and realized that there's got to be something more to the equation, that something else I can do, that it was that question and that journey that moved her from more of the traditional medicine oncology side into more this other side called functional and integrative medicine. We have a really great educational and informational conversation that I know you're going to really love. We talk about cellular health, self-care, how to take care of ourselves. We talk about some anti-aging components and why we age, and this thing called apoptosis, which is what happens when our cells vote to leave. They start voting against us. So we want to take care of ourselves, so they vote for us. And so she really breaks down what can be this very complex system in overall health and makes it very easy to understand. And there's some really great takeaways that we can apply to our lives right away after listening, just to help us feel better right after listening. So enjoy this conversation, and I really hope you get as many nuggets out of it as I did. Enjoy. All right. Well, Dr. Womack, it's so much fun to be here in your office, sitting in the heart of Austin, Texas. So thank you for being with me today.
It's my pleasure, and it's so great to have you here.
It feels so good walking in this place, because when I walk in, it's not like a conventional doctor's office. I mean, this place is about wellness. It's about optimal health. And I just love your passion for unconventional medicine and to truly help people learn and help them become healthy. But you're Harvard trained, right? Harvard Medical School?
I am. I went to Harvard Medical School. Actually went to Harvard College. So I call myself Preparation H, and there's sort of a 12-step program to recover from the arrogance.
Right. All right. And then you studied oncology, is that correct?
I did, at the City of Hope in Duarte, California.
And then here we are, you're sort of landed now, a few years later, and 9 kids later, into this, what we're calling functional medicine. And so that's pretty far from oncology and more traditional medicine, is it not?
It is a long distance from that. But my patients are the ones that took me on this journey.
So tell me about that.
Well, in my oncology training, about 6 months into my training, it was noticed by the teachers that were teaching me that I wasn't putting patients on study. And I had already looked around and seen how sick people got on chemotherapy. Mm-hmm. And I also saw a lot of people die. In fact, I think I was presided over 16 or 17 deaths my first 2 weeks there, which was unusual, but I think it was a message to me. And I saw people die in extremis, and I saw them without their business finished because they'd come to the City of Hope for hope. And they were so focused on their treatment, they weren't finishing their lives. And I got fascinated by that concept that life unfinished was worse than having more life. And so I was counseling people about chemotherapy with that in mind. And so patients were not signing up to do drug trials when they didn't have very much chance. I mean, I signed people up for sure where there was a chance that there was something that was going to be beneficial for them. But many people wound up not doing studies. And it wasn't on purpose. I was telling the truth. I wasn't steering them to alternative therapy because I didn't know anything about alternative therapy. I was actually talking about an alternative way to die, that to die with your friends around you without vomiting, when you were in your right mind, when you didn't require lots of drugs, might be a better way to die. And that was all that I knew. I didn't know anything about alternative medicine. So about 2 years into my training, after they had dealt with me, I think it was sort of like The Sound of Music. What do you do with a girl called Eleanor? Because I was a good doctor and patients liked me and I had good rapport and I took good care of people. So they actually had me skip my fellowship. They made me an attending physician there, and I was actually had triplets, so that was going to be easier for me anyway. And I was the no hope doctor of City of Hope.
Interesting.
So this was for the people who they had already determined by their pre-screening that they wouldn't want to put them on a study, and so those patients needed a different kind of doctor, and that turned out to be me. So I was given an office and I was given 2 hours to see every patient because they were flying in on private airplanes or they were coming from long distances to hear what City of Hope had to say about their disease. And I learned in those 2 hours from those patients how they felt and what their plans were and what they were going to do. But then 6 months, 8 months, a year, 2 years later, I was getting emails and I was getting phone calls from people who had lived.
Wow.
So they were teaching me that there was something to these things that I had dismissed as ridiculous alternative therapies.
So give me some examples of those at that time, because this was...
Well, people were changing they were changing their diet.
Okay.
They were taking supplements. They were getting massage. They were working on therapy. They were
you're
looking for God.
You're recommending this because there's no hope, and you're saying, okay, if you're going to die well, I recommend to feel as good as you can during this process to try.
But I didn't know what to tell them at first.
Okay.
I didn't know what to recommend, and so I learned about vitamin D, and I learned about vitamin C, and I learned about green diets. I learned about eating a balanced diet. In those days, I don't think I understood about the difference between inflammatory and non-inflammatory foods. And then I got sick myself. And I think that was what really did it. I got sick myself and I went to Massachusetts General Hospital. I went to Mayo Clinic. I went to Cleveland Clinic, and nobody could tell me what was wrong with me. And at that point I saw a chiropractor for some back pain, and he addressed my medical issues. And by addressing diet and by addressing supplementation. And I was so amazed that the simple things that he was asking me to do, which were the things I'd remembered that these dying cancer patients had done. In fact, some of the things he asked me to do, I thought, but I don't have cancer. And he said, well, you don't have to have cancer to take vitamin D.
Wow.
And my inflammation went away and I felt better. So then I had to really question my medical training and question what I had learned. And then I got busy because at that point, I think I was 6 children into 9 children. And so I had really at that point been disillusioned with medicine and I had retired. And so I took care of my own health and read a lot about vitamins and read passionately actually about alternative health, but I was still too Harvard to jump into saying that was what I wanted to do with my life. And I kind of wanted to do it, but I couldn't imagine how you could do it. And during that same 20 years, there was this burgeoning field of alternative medicine with its own institutions growing. And so by the time I finally decided to do it, there were a lot of people who at the same time that I was having my questions had theirs and had started the IFM, which is the Institute for Functional Medicine, and then A4M, which is it's anti-aging. Anyway, there's 4 A's in medicine. So I was able to take classes through both of those institutions and was able to establish a practice feeling as though I had some people behind me. I wasn't all by myself. But even within that, I think I do things a little bit differently. And going back to what I did at City of Hope, which was I spend 2 hours with every new patient, even though they don't have cancer. And then I spend an hour to an hour and a half on follow-ups. So I really get to know people. And I think a big part of what integrative medicine is about treating both the person's physical issues, but treating them in the context of what is your life like? What are you doing? What is your energy level like? What are you experiencing in your marriage? What are you experiencing with your children? What is your job like? Or if you don't have those things, what are you doing? And understanding people's social interactions, understanding people's backgrounds has a huge impact on their health. And I think about how I would have practiced medicine differently if I hadn't learned to understand people's physical issues in the context of their life. Because I think sometimes we physicians are trained to write prescriptions for things that may actually be anathema to the way the person's living, but they haven't bothered to ask and they haven't found out. And if we're really going to be integrative, then we're going to understand someone's social circumstances, someone's spiritual circumstances, someone's emotional circumstances in the context of the symptom that they're experiencing.
And so it's whole body, whole life.
Whole body, whole life.
And that means it's a little bit different for everyone. So you can't listen for like 10, 15 minutes and say, oh, I think it's this, and here's a medication.
Right. Absolutely.
That should take care of that. And is it, it sounds like it's a little bit less about treat a symptom and more about what's the root cause, or what's this whole situation here that might be causing this, what appears to be this symptom.
Yes. Although there are times when, with discretion, I mean, I might treat the same symptom in one person with exercise, in another person with diet, in another person with a prescription. So depending on the person and their level of wanting to understand it, their level of wanting to address it. So I am free to do it all depending on what the patient needs. And I really do try to understand where the patient is coming from. And I also don't want to impose my own value system. So I'm actually listening to their value system, because my own value system isn't going to necessarily work for everyone. And each person needs what they need in the context of their life.
Is more let's say what we're calling the traditional medicine and traditional, let's say, doctors, is it more like, because it's rotation and it's fast. So how can they listen for 10 or 15 minutes and then diagnose?
They can't, because of there are financial constraints. And I would say that if you want to know why something's working or not working, follow the money. And our medical system is right now, when the third party is paying, they're paying about $35 per 7 minutes. So if a physician wants to make more than $100 an hour, that physician has to see 5 to 6 patients in that hour. And of that $35, the doctor's only going to get about 6 or 7 of it, because the rest is going to go to the 5 employees it takes to extract that money from the insurance company.
Wow.
So I have a cash-based practice, so that I don't have to have those extra employees. And in addition, if I were taking insurance, I would have to practice medicine using the standard of care. I'm obviously not practicing medicine using the standard of care. I am using a standard that, I'm beholden to A4M and to IFM to practice their standard of care. But I'm not beholden to and I'm also beholden to the Texas Medical Association to practice good medicine. But I'm not practicing the standard of care. As an insurance provider, I would take an oath to do that, and I would have to. And so I would have to treat all situations with prescriptions. Now, when I see patients, I tell them what the diagnosis and the treatment would be in regular medicine. And I ask them to identify that. And at some point soon, I'm going to have them sign something that says, yes, you heard that the treatment for your issue is, I need to give you statin drugs, and I need to do this, and I need to do that. Well, instead, we're going to do diet and exercise. And you are acknowledging that we're making this difference. So they are recognizing that they're getting an alternative. Mm-hmm. Frequently, that step is skipped because they come to me saying they want the alternative.
Right.
But I think it's important to understand there is an alternative. Not that I would press anybody to do it. In some situations, people say, my family's not comfortable unless I do the standard of care. And I'll say, well, let's do that, plus decrease your inflammation.
And how do you, have you noticed how often, or maybe the opposite of that, of how often is it that patients of yours actually need a prescription?
Well, my patient population is usually between the ages of 40 and 65 or 70. So a lot of them are on bioidentical hormone. Mm-hmm. So I do write prescriptions to compounding pharmacies. That would be a little different, though. I mean, more your traditional Right. But you're talking about pharmaceutical drugs.
Pharmaceutical, yes.
So if I use a pharmaceutical, I use them repurposed. So I will sometimes use a statin drug, for the specific situation where someone needs to reduce inflammation, but I'll only use it 3 times a week at a greatly reduced dose. So I might not use it with my goal of reducing their cholesterol, but with the goal of reducing their inflammation. So I do prescribe statins. That may come as a shock, not to everyone. It's based on looking at very specific markers in their blood and looking at their genetics that this person would benefit. So I would say probably 40% of the people I treat for heart disease are on a small amount of statin, but the rest don't qualify by my idea of how to treat.
As opposed to probably close to 100% on the other side, right?
Right.
But what you're noticing, what you noticed, it sounded like 20 plus years ago, and what you're noticing now is that there's really not necessarily a need for 100% because we can start reversing things with food and lifestyle and relationships and these different life pieces that are a function of overall health.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Well, today what I want to talk about, thank you. I think it's so important for us to be educated as just the layman out there as to how this medical system works. Because if we don't, I know there's probably a lot of people like me that are listening that you find yourself sick and then you go through this traditional path. And I was in that 7-minute cycle for 10 different doctors, and each doctor told me something different, and each doctor threw a different prescription at me. And I was just so going to them to try to get help, and I was more confused than not by the time I left, and I just was on a bunch of drugs. So, but not understanding that's the system I was in, and that's where I'm very passionate about is bringing a new awareness of how that system works and that there are alternatives for those that might want to seek those out.
And I would really have compassion for those physicians. I want to say it's not an us versus them. I was one of those doctors. I was exhausted and tired and sick, and I didn't have faith in what I was doing. So the energy that I brought in the room to a sick patient wasn't the right one because I didn't feel well, and I didn't believe that what I was doing could help anybody because it wasn't helping me.
Right.
So you have to have compassion, and I really would not denigrate what they're doing because a lot of them are doing the very best they can within the system. They haven't given up yet. They're still trying. But it's very difficult to see someone when you know you have to get out of that room. And so you learn to not engage the person. You learn you learn ways to shorten the conversation by squashing little things you see coming up because you know, oh, that's a half an hour. So you discourage them with body language, you discourage them with voice, and you start walking backwards out the door with your hand on the handle while you're handing the prescription to them.
Right.
And so please don't hate your doctor. Love them. Have compassion for them because they're sick too. This whole system makes all of us sick.
Yeah, that's important. I'm glad you said that. Also, I think another sort of what I learned in going through the process is that granted, the doctors, and that's kind of the standard of care in the system, but there's also a component where we're not taking care of ourselves. And there's a knowledge and even responsibility that by taking care of ourselves, sometimes we can even avoid that altogether.
Yes.
So it's learning the self-care piece and that there's so many components of being healthy that if we take care and listen to our body, that our body actually is an intelligence and will tell us things that, we have a responsibility in this whole thing too.
Yes.
Would you agree with that?
I agree with that completely. And it's truth telling. I think a lot of people know the truth that they don't feel so well after they drink alcohol, but they don't tell the truth to themselves at the point at which somebody says, let's go have a drink. So they don't tell that truth, or they don't feel well after they eat specific meals, or they eat a lot of carbohydrates, or they eat specific sugars. They know those things make them feel achy. They know those things make their tummy blow up, and they don't sleep well that night. But they don't honor that truth. And so when we really listen and we're contemplative about the way we eat and drink, it changes the way we eat or drink. And then that makes us social pariahs to a certain extent because people say, well, aren't you going to have that second glass of wine? Or aren't you going to have this pasta? How could you turn down Aunt Susie's special casserole or her peach cobbler? But if it makes you sick, you have to say, oh, I love you, Aunt Susie, but I I can't eat that today. It is delicious, and I'm so glad you prepared it for me.
I think the mindset, though, is that, and this self-care piece, that there's a standard of care of medicine, but there's the standard of care of how we take care of ourselves.
Yes.
Also, that's a missing piece. And it's sort of this, I want to be able to drink and then take a prescription to take care of that. And I want to be able to eat whatever I want and take an antacid. And, so I guess we're part of this.
Yes. And the medical system is part of that too, because it tells you can have it all and so it helps you not tell the truth, So I'm exhausted because I work too many hours, but I want to work harder. I'm distracted and confused because I'm not getting rest and there's too much going on in my life. So I'm going to take Adderall, or I'm going to take New Vigil so I can stay up and work harder. And I'm borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, and the doctor's enabling me to do that instead of addressing what are my goals? Why have I chosen to do this? And there are times when I will write one of those prescriptions because someone says to me, I have to make the mortgage. This is what's happening. So I'll say, well, for a short period of time, let's review this in 4 months. So I'm acknowledging that they're in the process of growing, that they've acknowledged that they have an issue, but this is how they're going to get through the next 4 months.
Right.
So, but a physician who says, oh, that's no problem, we can take care of it, that physician's helping the patient to tell that lie to themselves that they can burn the candle at both ends and get away with it.
Yeah, without any consequence.
Right.
So there's so many topics that we could explore together. And you're just a bundle of just knowledge on so many topics, and when it comes to medicine and alternative medicine. But really what I wanted to, something I'm very interested in myself, and I've been doing, my layman study, but really what I want to bring forth to others is this idea of energy. And this even this term that I think many of us have heard is called anti-aging. And so I think especially as women in magazines, when we hear the word anti-aging, what's the first thing we think of? Well, skincare cream or whatever. Number one, most of those are chemical laden anyway, and we probably shouldn't be using them. But that aside, I want to talk about anti-aging from the inside out and start exploring this and this self-care piece. What is this aging process? Can we slow it down? Why do some people age faster than others? Is it possible to look good but kind of be really sick on the inside?
Well, they think there's the myth that the person who has glowing skin and beautiful hair and gorgeous skin and big breasts and a small waist is healthy. And that same person could be extremely healthy if they got there by eating well and by exercising and by getting good sleep. But that person could also look exactly like that. Not up close, but certainly on a magazine, they could look that way. Well, because the magazine might have photoshopped it, but independent of that, they could look that way at a gala because they're had plastic surgery. They're on some sort of a stimulant. They have had toxic chemicals put in their face. They've had things done to them that actually are hastening their death rather than prolonging their life. And so if we're talking about really being healthy and living longer, we have to go right down to the cellular level. And this is oversimplifying, but you could say that the cells in our body actually take a vote. That the cells in our body take a look at the soup they're swimming in, the extracellular fluid that we're producing for them, and they say, I'm leaving this ship or I'm staying on this ship. And as they vote to leave the ship, we age faster. And as they vote to stay on the ship and to stay healthy as cells and keep all their enzymes working and keep all their functions functioning, then we're going to live longer and feel better. And we're going to actually have health. We'll have real health. And the process of cells leaving the ship is something called apoptosis. So my job as an anti-aging physician is to prevent apoptosis. So I'm like your election consultant that comes alongside you and helps you get the votes of your cells. Okay, so we want your cells to vote for you, not against you. Okay, so if I'm 14 years old and I'm sitting on the couch and I'm eating Papa John's pizza and McDonald's every day, and all I'm exercising is my thumb on the remote, my body is actually going to start voting against me. And we have kids at 17, 18, 19 years old that need triple bypass because their cells, so many of those cells, their cells have left the ship that their hearts are shutting down. And so, I mean, that's the end stage of it. But for someone in their 50s who has, well, I'm going to say 40s is when it usually happens. Someone in their 40s whose hormones are leaving, the cells are taking a toll. One of the things that is one of the markers for whether they're going to vote to stay or leave is whether the hormones are still here. Because the cell's purpose, an individual cell, we're going down to our voter now, okay? We ask that cell what it's here for, and it says, well, I'm here to see that I reproduce and that the DNA that I have actually gets reproduced into a new individual. So if my hormones are normal, then every cell in the body is bathed in estrogen or testosterone, progesterone, DHEA. It's seeing those hormones all the time. And when those hormones leave, the cell actually turns off essential enzymes that produce energy that keep me alive. My mitochondria start to decrease when my hormones decrease. So my cells have less energy to actually do function. So you could see my skin sag. You could see me begin to age because I don't have hormones. You can see women have dry hair. Their hair falls out. Those hair follicles have noticed that there's no hormones. They're voting to leave. So the hair's falling out. So if I replace hormones, I'm already creating a milieu where the cells have one of the things they're looking for is they're saying, are the hormones there? A big one is exercise. If I have reproduced, now I had those hormones and I reproduced, now I've got to feed that progeny. So my cells are checking, is the heart rate going up to 140 a couple times really, really fast and a big exertion? Because then she must be catching bison for the progeny and we'll keep her around because she's an active member of the tribe and she's feeding the kids. So she can belong. So high intensity, intermittent exercise is a really important way to get the votes of your cells. So if you want to stay young, we talked about hormones, we talked about exercise. Then the cells are also looking for some very complex chemicals in the blood that have to do with inflammation. And I've talked about inflammation a lot. Inflammation for the average person is when you come to the end of the day and your ankles are swollen all the time, or you have achy joints, or you notice that your eyes are puffy all the time, or you've noticed that you're actually developing a midsection that just won't go away no matter whether you exercise or diet. That's inflammation in the body, especially the achy joints and that kind of pain. Somebody may go as far as having skin rashes. Inflammation manifests itself in many diseases that actually have diagnoses, but those are sort of the things that we call aging that are actually inflammatory conditions. And those have to do with diet. So those have to do with the food I put in my mouth. And the food I put in my mouth has effects on me directly in my gut, in that when I hurt the gut lining itself, I actually hurt all the reflecting tissues. So underneath my eyes will get puffy or dark because my intestines are actually hurting. And this tissue reflects that tissue. Wow. Or I may get puffy in my ankles, or I may get puffy somewhere else. I may hold on to fluid after eating certain foods. So if I eat a big pasta dinner the next day, not only do I gain the weight from the pasta dinner, but I also gain all this water weight. I'm holding on to water for a few days. That's inflammation from food. But in addition, I'm affecting there's something called a microbiome, which is 100 trillion bacteria that live in your intestine. And those bacteria are making important proteins that help the communication to go on in your body. We all know about neurotransmitters. A lot of the neurotransmitters that are communicating in your brain are coming from that microbiome, which is bacteria. Those bacteria are making the precursors to those proteins, or they may even be making some of those proteins directly so that your brain can function. So if I'm eating foods that are hurting the microbiome, I'm hurting protein synthesis in my body. I'm hurting my capacity to provide on a daily basis for communication inside my body. So the health of the microbiome is one of the other votes I'm trying to get from my cells. So how I eat is also getting votes. So taking my hormones, exercising, eating properly, eating in a way that's safe for me, telling truth to myself about how I feel when I eat. I'm also going to want to take vitamin D and omega-3 fish oils. And this goes way back, and it's kind of funny. We probably were designed to be mostly naked by the ocean. because we have specific receptors, again, on every cell in our body. So they're all voting, and we have receptors for vitamin D and for omega-3, which comes from fish primarily. So we were designed to eat those foods. And when we're eating those foods, the cells say, oh, okay, this person is doing what they're supposed to be doing. They must be out in the sun getting food for the progeny, or they're collecting fish to feed the progeny, and the gut's working, and she's exercising, and she's got hormones, so we're keeping her. We're voting, okay? So they're looking for vitamin D in fish oil. So those are two supplements that I really ask people to take regularly if they can, fish oil and vitamin D. And I follow those levels. I actually do test to look to make sure that both are showing up in their blood. And that correlates with how people feel. Just adding vitamin D alone, if someone says, oh, I can't take a bunch of stuff, I say, well, just take your vitamin D. And they'll come back and they'll say, that's amazing. What did you give me? And I said, it was vitamin D. So vitamin D is wonderful. And then sleep is incredibly important. So if the cell's taking a vote and it's saying, well, if she's up all night, she's probably going to lead the progeny to the wrong place, or she's not safe, and maybe we'll just walk out because this is obviously not a safe body to live in. This is not a safe person to have in the tribe. Let's vote against this one. So if you're not sleeping, the body doesn't have time to repair things, doesn't have time to fix things, and what shows up in the serum that the cells are living in isn't as healthy as it would be if you were sleeping. So being attentive to sleep, protecting sleep. And these are points, we talked about telling the truth to yourself. If you're not sleeping, you need to figure out why. And the answer to that may be very, very, very complex. And it may be on every level we've talked about. It may be emotional, it may be spiritual, and it may be physical. And understanding why you're not sleeping is huge. So if you're finding time to exercise, so we've already given people some points where if they're doing all of those things, they've had to tell the truth, and they've had to change some things in their life to get to a place where they can sleep, to get to a place where they can eat healthily. And someone might not need to see a doctor. I mean, this is why I have to recover from my Harvard arrogance. There are trainers in this town who are better doctors than I am, because they can motivate people. They see them frequently. They motivate them. They get them exercising, get them to change the way they're eating, because they change their diet so that they can exercise better. They change their diet so they can sleep better, so they can exercise better the next day. They're motivated. They never come to see me. I don't need to see the people that are working with that trainer, because that trainer is a better doctor than I'll ever be. There's one more. There is just one more. And the last one is one that we actually have some cool science about. They've been able to look at the DNA of people, and they've been able to correlate the rate of aging with the loss of these little tails on the DNA. They're kind of like the thing that holds your shoelace together at the end of your shoelace. They're called telomeres, and your telomeres shorten as you get older. And one of the things that keeps your telomeres from getting short is relationships. So the final thing in my list of things to prevent apoptosis is relational. And there again, I don't know what signal those cells are getting that tells them to keep the DNA long, but the cells don't go into apoptosis when we're in committed relationships with community and with individuals. So we have a good relationship where we expect joy in the relationship, we experience joy, and our joy bucket gets filled up every day, so our hearts are full, and we have love to give as well as the ability to receive love. And that takes, you could have everything else together and not have that one, and I think you'd probably still be okay, but you should be working towards it. So I'm actually hoping that I get people healthy enough working on the others so that they can work on that one.
Wow, that's a new one for me. So this is research, these telomeres?
Yeah, they've looked at telomeres, and they've looked at telomeres in these areas called blue zones. And they find that the people in these blue zones have longer telomeres. And these are places where people live into their 80s, 90s, 100s, and they live a long time with very healthy cells and not a lot of medical intervention and no prescriptions, because they're meeting regularly with people they love in community. They feel important to that community. They feel as they have dignity within that community. And you think about that versus the way we treat our older people in this country, where we warehouse them and we don't respect their needs. We don't respect their input. We don't receive from them, nor do we give to them.
Well, and one of my favorite lines is, it's not just about adding life to our years, but adding years to our life. And so it sounds like in this anti-aging, a couple different things I find fascinating is if I hear you correctly, it's as though our bodies, our cells, this intelligence is constantly paying attention to say, are we a productive part of society, of keeping the species going? That's way beyond just ourselves and survival, but it's about the species.
It's about the species.
So that's fascinating. So we're as our body, this cellular intelligence, cellular health and intelligence, as it's thinking, oh, this body will continue to be a productive part of society and the species to keep it going. I'm going to keep this body alive and healthy and energy, but I'm going to start casting votes against this body if it looks like it's just going to take space on the planet and not necessarily serve a good purpose. I mean, is it?
Well, I mean, I think I don't think the cellular purpose is beyond keeping the progeny alive. But keeping the progeny alive, I have 9 of them, so I have some idea of how difficult this is. And so I think you're absolutely true. We are made to be social creatures because social interaction actually prolongs the life of the entire species. Mm-hmm. So the isolated individual, number one, doesn't reproduce, and the isolated family doesn't necessarily survive. So we survive as a tribe.
Right. Well, that's fascinating. And so it's kind of an easy self-diagnosis, is that are we in a state, body, mind, and spirit, to keep the progeny going, the society, the species alive, and many times our habits, practices, and overall health, it's like, I'm not really adding.
And then I'm not requiring, I also want to be very specific, because there are lots of people that don't have children that haven't reproduced. Your body's not looking to whether or not you've had a child or not. So your health is not going to be determined by whether or not you actually have reproduced or not. Your body's simply looking for the hormones for the possibility. So no one should ever feel that they are obligated to have children. And just because I have 9 of them, I've had some of them for you. So if you haven't had children, I got it covered for you.
Right. So let's, to sum that up, it sounds like, okay, the best anti-aging medicine is about prescription, I guess, is things that are so fundamental. Of course, there's the hormones that are a little bit more complex, and we probably, sounds like we need to get those tested.
We should,
yes. And know some optimal levels as we age. So that might be tip number 1 is we probably all need to get our hormones tested.
I think we do. Absolutely.
Okay. And then 2 is good old food. Is there foods to avoid that produce this inflammation? Is there a diet in particular that you more or less promote? What do you say on the food front so people can move more to the anti-aging food approach?
Well, now I start meddling. So this is always at the point of my visit with the patient where I say, well, up until now you've liked me and you thought I was cute and I'm kind of spunky, but now you're not going to like me anymore. So food, the foods that are inflammatory really start with the grains. And I would say the number 1 thing I ask people to give up is wheat. And I don't test people for whether they're sensitive to wheat or not. I have a list of reasons why I don't want people to eat wheat. The number 1 is that it does cause leaky gut in many, many, many people. It increases intestinal permeability. But the second is that the wheat in this country is sprayed with glyphosates, which are, the best known one is Roundup, but because they're changing the names, we call it glyphosate, so they can't get away with that. And glyphosates actually destroy that microbiome we were talking about. So eating grains in general, because all the grains are sprayed, so not just wheat is sprayed, but corn and soy and oats are sprayed. Because of that, I recommend people don't eat grains. Now, there are lots of exceptions, and there are people who come to me and say, I've eaten oatmeal all my life, and it's my favorite food. And I say, then you should continue to eat oatmeal. And if someone is in love with corn and that's their only alternative, I'll say go ahead and keep eating corn, but be truthful.
And make sure it's not genetically modified.
And make sure it's not genetically modified. And hopefully it's not sprayed.
Right.
So I would say that grains are the first set of foods that I really discourage people from eating. And then for a subclass of people, I also ask them not to eat beans. So people who are particularly sensitive to wheat, so those who are wheat sensitive or celiac, I don't want them to eat beans either. And then I seriously question people's ability to eat dairy. I ask them to take a 3-month break from dairy and then reintroduce it and be honest about what they experience. For a lot of people, cow dairy is very toxic.
Now, something as simple as having a little cream in your coffee, is any amount of dairy?
I think people get away with small amounts of dairy. Some people can't even have cream in their coffee, but I think that's individual.
All right, so we're taking grains and dairy, and
so that diet sounds like the paleo diet, and I would say the paleo diet. The paleo diet is a religion, and just like all religion, it has a lot of different sects within it. So, just like there's Methodists and there's Episcopalians. So within the paleo diet, there are people that are eating paleo for athletic performance, and they're eating huge quantities of fat and lots and lots and lots of protein. Then there are people that are doing it for autoimmune reasons. There are people who are eating because they want to lose weight, and they would eat a different kind of a paleo diet. So I have about 17 different ways to eat paleo. And then I also, within paleo, I have people that eat very strictly paleo, but they also eat rice. Because they've found that they can eat rice, and it's a great carbohydrate that helps them to sleep during the night. So I'm not a fanatic in that. Again, it's every individual, and having that person tell themselves the truth about how they're eating, and then adding foods and subtracting foods that make them feel poorly or make them feel well.
And testing it.
Testing.
Yeah. I'm adding dairy back in, and now my stomach's giving me all sorts of problems. Maybe I should stay off dairy. Right. And then exercise. You'd mentioned high intensity exercise.
So high intensity exercise is wonderful. I know that you do a special kind of exercise that doesn't require a lot of cardio. Or do you do cardio also?
I do some cardio as well. Yes.
So cardio exercise is incredibly important to some very specific proteins that help the heart function better. So I would say everyone ought to do at least 3 hours a week, and it can be broken up. I mean, I have one patient that came to me and said, I'm going to do 7 minutes of cardio every day for 6 months. And she said, I'm not an exerciser, but I bought this machine. I'm going to do 7 minutes. That's no more and no less. And she was able to turn around her blood tests so that they looked completely different. The only change she made was 7 minutes of exercise every day. But she said she was drenched in sweat at the end of those 7 minutes. So it was very high intensity. She really caught a buffalo every day. So,
and our cells like it.
And
if we're still catching buffalo, that means we're
part of it.
That's right. We're going to keep the species going. And then vitamin D and some omegas. Because we're probably all deficient in both those, because we're not eating enough fish. It's just where the omegas come from, and we're not in sunlight. And these are very necessary.
People say, well, I'm in the sunlight because I'm in my car. Well, they actually, the study's been done. They tested 100 lifeguards in California. They tested their vitamin D level throughout the summer. And they tested, as controls, they tested the people that were in the water, in the ocean. And it turned out there was a 50-point difference in the vitamin D levels. So if you are in a bathing suit in the sun for 8 hours a day with a little bit of sunscreen, you're going to have a vitamin D level of 80 to 90.
Wow.
If you're in the ocean surfing, your vitamin D level is going to be 35 to 40. So when we talk about sun exposure, your golf game's not enough sun exposure 3 times a week. Your tennis game twice a week is not enough sun exposure. You really do need to supplement vitamin D.
All right. And then these little telomere.
Oh, the little telomeres. Well, you just gotta dial into some people, tell the truth to them, let them tell you their truth, and experience that kind of joy. Because that joy somehow does something to our DNA, and I don't know how.
Wow. All right. Well, thank you. And this is all doable.
Absolutely.
It's all doable. And like, our health really is so much in our hands if we listen, if we take some pretty simple advice. And I love your words is like, and tell ourselves the truth.
Yes.
Like, be truthful with ourselves and take care of ourselves. Like, love ourselves, right?
Exactly.
Love ourselves and love others.
And if you can't do that, then figure out why. Because sometimes it's hard. And some people experience tremendous difficulty in loving others or loving themselves. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't preclude it. There's a way you can get through that.
So what would you recommend somebody that's sort of hearing this sort of advice for the first time? What's like the first step to take to sort of
go find that trainer. Save their money.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. You know how much I adore you, and you make the world a better place, and keep doing what you're doing.
My pleasure. Thank you. Same to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Dr. Womack. I think you can tell she is a wealth of information and applicable knowledge that we can put to work right away. If you want to learn more about Dr. Womack and her practice, you can link to her through our show notes. And if you enjoyed the episode, please make sure you subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Next up, I interview Dr. Womack's husband, Clay Womack, and he talks more on the technology side of health and wellness, tools and technologies that are available to us today that we can use to hack our health for optimal health. And specifically, we delve into this conversation of oxygen and using hyperbaric chambers and why they're so effective to reduce inflammation, can reverse some disease. But on the other side of the equation, really how we hack our health for optimal health, optimal energy, optimal vitality. It's a really fun conversation. We've been in the conversation with my getting into a hyperbaric chamber myself and have a lot of fun with the protocol. So enjoy this episode. As always, make it a wealthy, wealthy life. Until next time.